Hello and welcome to AP World History Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a lot about China, and so what I'm going to do, like the first part is, and so what I want to do is I want to kind of backtrack a little. This part is not in your chapter, but I feel like in order to understand the Song Dynasty, we need to kind of backtrack and look a little bit at the Sui and the Tang because of their impact on the Song Dynasty. I almost feel like it's impossible to understand the Song without having these two there. So the Sui dynasty was important because they are going to unite northern and southern China. They're going to build the Grand Canal, which let's go back and look at this beautiful map. So they're going to build the Grand Canal. So let's look here. They're going to build this, and this is going to unite northern and southern China. Why is that important? Well, one, they were just a bunch of little warring areas at one time, but they're going to unite all of China together. Now, China does not have the huge population yet. But what's going to happen is they're going to get this, they're going to come down here to Vietnam, and they're going to get this drought resistant rice called champa rice from Champa, Vietnam, and they're going to ship it on up in through China. Now, because of that rice, they're going to be able to feed a lot of people. So rice here in Southeast Missouri, we can plant rice once a year, but it also requires tons of water. You see the crop machines going crazy. You see the white tubes pumping water out into the rice fields. Their rice, I'm sorry, I've got my arrow off a little bit on my Vietnam here, but their rice is drought resistant, so it doesn't require as much water, and also they can plant it 3 times a year. Big difference. Also, 609 CE, this isn't going to be a dynasty that's going to last for very long, but it's going to have a huge impact. So pay attention to what the size and shape of China is here. Know that they are the ones who united southern and northern China via the Grand Canal, and they're transporting champa rice from Champa, Vietnam. It's drought resistant and can be grown more than once. But also, by the time you get to the Tang Dynasty, which is not very much further, 700, less than 100 years, you're going to see a population boom in China because food equals babies. Okay, so because food equals babies, and you have a lot of food, you have a lot of babies. And then for the Tang Dynasty, they're not going to be worried about food, so they're going to focus on other things. Very similar to Paleolithic, Neolithic. Neolithic got to worry about other things, which was creating a government. So enter the bureaucracy of Chinese history. But notice the size of this. I always like to say that this looks like here's a blob and here's a blob and here's a string, and they're playing tug of war. And to me, that is the Tang Dynasty tug of war. So just to get an idea of what the dynasty's shapes are and which ones are which. So what they're going to be known for. So a bureaucracy is a type of government where you've got a person or people at the top, and people answer to them, and then of course people answer to those people, and then people answer to those people. And so if you have a bureaucracy that is just everybody answers to someone. Well, the thing with the Chinese dynasty's bureaucracy, the Tang Dynasty, they have Confucianism on their side. And if you are Confucian, of course you have to listen to the government. That's part of your ruling. Got to listen to the government. And so their bureaucracy was smooth and seamless, which is why it was so attractive to so many other people. So now let's get into the Song Dynasty. So the Song Dynasty had a golden age of 960, but keep in mind, the reason that these other dynasties were to prosper, we give credit to the Sui or the Sui because they're the ones who got the champa rice. They're the ones that were able to help that population grow. So during the Song Dynasty, the examination system is going to be the way people were going to move up and out in society. Before this, the civil service exam was something that only elite people took, or people who had a name, or people who were somebody. But during this time period, anybody could take this test, which meant that people are going to get these jobs based on merit. And that's going to be huge for China. So what we have here is we have China, we have Korea, we have Japan, we have Vietnam. All of these areas that are close to us are really going to pay attention to China, and they're going to take a lot of things from China. So let's go ahead and look at the golden age of art and literature. Like I said, anybody could take this civil service exam. And so people end up being selected for jobs based on merit, which is going to lead to an economic revolution, making China the richest, most skilled, and most populous country on earth. That is insane. their population is going to go from 60 million to 120 million. Wow. China is going to be the most urbanized, and then Hangzhou is going to be the most populated, and that is a port here in China. And again, all of this happens because food equals babies. Now, this Grand Canal is going to allow the people to be fed. Guys, if you'll start to notice, and hopefully you have even started to notice, that food is kind of key. We all know you have to have food to survive, but it also plays a huge impact on governing. It plays a huge impact on absolutely everything going on. Without food, you've got nothing. With food, you have a lot. If you have a surplus of food, you know you don't have to worry about certain things. You can focus on other things. Now, women in the Song Dynasty did not have it the greatest. Remember, Confucian women always have to answer to their husbands, their brothers, the men, right? So Chinese women are going to end up going through what is called foot binding. That is this right here. This is to be a sign of beauty. Notice this is not an old photo in black and white. This is something that even was, unfortunately, more modern. It was in the 1900s when they actually started to get rid of this. So during the Song Dynasty, this was a sign of beauty, little bitty lotus flower feet. And Confucian writers are going to emphasize this subordination of women. They're going to be like, yes, 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 this is what women should do. And so during the Song Dynasty, you're going to see women who are elites. Not everyone is foot binding because these women are not working. This is not a working woman. You know, they have that general stereotype of Chinese women, like the old Chinese women shuffling their feet and moving really slow. But what it's from is from foot binding. They couldn't move real fast. Their feet are literally broken. And so they didn't work. They didn't move around. And since they didn't leave their homes a lot, one thing under them is that their property rights under the Song Dynasty are actually going to expand, which is very strange considering they're so subordinate. They could control their own dowries, inherit properties from their families. And again, I guess this is a good thing since they weren't allowed to leave their house, really. Not that they weren't allowed to, but it was pretty difficult. Down with the patriarchy because there's no way anybody's doing that to me. So.
Hey guys, it's Mike Chen. China is full of beautiful women. I mean, even right now, if you go to China, you're going to find a lot of beautiful women. But just imagine how many beautiful Chinese women there were throughout 5,000 years of Chinese history. It's like 600. I mean, there's just too many. And there were four women, yes, only four, who were said to be the most beautiful. And I mean the most beautiful in Chinese history. That's like someone nowadays winning Miss America, Miss USA, Miss Universe, basically every single beauty pageant in the world and doing it for like 1,000 years in a row. Now, I know I've talked about them before, the four most beautiful women in Chinese history. They are, of course, Xi Shi, Wang Zhaojun, Diao Chan, and Yang Guifei. But in previous videos, we kind of just rushed through them, giving a little bit of details. So let's start off with the first of the four most beautiful women in Chinese history, Xi Shi. Xi Shi, who was thought to be the most beautiful of the four beauties of Chinese history, was born in 506 BC in China's Zhejiang province in a small village called Xicun, or West Village. Because a lot of people in the village had the last name Shi, and because she was born in the West Village, people all referred to her as Xi Shi. Xi Shi was born in a pretty ordinary household. Her father sold firewood for a living, and her mother did silk work. Ever since she was little, Xi Shi would often go with her mother to the riverbank to wash the silk. And it was said that Xi Shi was so beautiful that when the fish in the river would see her, that they would forget how to swim and sink to the bottom of the water, which brought about a popular saying, 西施沉鱼, meaning that Xi Shi was so beautiful that fish would, like I said, forget how to swim and sink away from the surface when she walks by. Another legend that spoke of her beauty said that even when Xi Shi frowned and slouched, she looked so beautiful that local girls would try to imitate her frowning face and slouchy posture. Of course, it probably didn't look so good on them. Now, even though Xi Shi was born into an ordinary household, her life was anything but. She lived during the spring and autumn period. Basically, back then, China wasn't one country, but made up of several states like mini kingdoms. And those states were constantly fighting with each other. Xixi was from the state of Yue, which was vanquished by the state of Wu. After the kingdom of Yue was annihilated, the king of Yue, Goujian, was forced to serve the prince of Wu, Fuchai, for 3 years. According to legend, Goujian and his advisors thought of a way to beat the Wu state, because it was widely known that Fuchai, who had then become the king of the Wu state, was a sucker for pretty women. And Goujian knew that if Fuchai was surrounded by beauties, he would be so distracted that he will have no energy to tend to his country. But in order for the plan to succeed, Goujian needed to enlist a loyal woman of stunning beauty who is willing to sacrifice herself for the good of her country. Thus, Xixi was chosen. Goujian then ordered his minister Fan Li to take Xixi to Fuchai as a tribute gift from Yue. But on the way to the Wu state, Xixi fell deeply in love with the wise, kind minister, the tall, dark, and handsome Fan Li during the journey. Actually, wait a minute, this is ancient China, so more likely Fan Li was probably short and pale. Anyway, love is blind. But regardless, they fell deeply in love with each other. Now, of course, they were alone, so they did have the chance to escape, but both Fan Li and Xixi were loyal to their country, and they were willing to sacrifice themselves and their love for each other for it. But before they parted, they made a secret pledge of undying love. And as expected, when Xixi was brought before Fuchai, he was deeply enchanted by her beauty and started to spend more and more time with her and began to neglect his political duties. When he eventually realized that he should not have been so bewitched by Xixi, it was too late. By that time, the US state had become powerful again, and Goujian, leading the Yue army, invaded Wu and forced Fuchai to commit suicide. Thus, Xixu's mission was complete. Now, there are two versions of what happened to Xixu right after this. One is that she drowned in a river. The other, and the one I of course choose to believe, was that she reunited with Fan Li, who quit his position as the minister, so the couple could get away from all the conflict and live the rest of their lives in obscurity, happily ever after. It's kind of interesting. There are a lot of stories in Chinese history where a man and a woman they want to live a secluded life, so they leave the city and they go somewhere in just the wilderness, or climb a mountain or something, and they build a hut and they live there for the rest of their lives. Now, my biggest question is, how do they all know how to do that? I mean, their survival skills are like really high.
Okay. So, beauty in Chinese history has definitely always and is still today something that is a big focus. So now we go on to interacting with China and its neighbors. So there are several countries here. We just showed you the map here a minute ago. Let's go back and revisit that so we're familiar with what I'm talking about. So we've got Korea, Japan, and then Vietnam. All right, I like those maps. So Korea is going to mainly stay independent, but they're going to participate in what is called a tribute system. This is basically going to keep the peace. They do not want to have China invade them. China is very close to Korea. China very easily could take over Korea if they wanted. So instead of doing that, Korea is going to offer them tribute. They're going to give them things to stop China or encourage China not to invade. Confucianism is going to take a strong hold in Korea. Also, the idea of filial piety. Filial piety, why is this a bad word for women? I don't think it's the filial piety. Confucianism is bad for women because, again, subservient. Filial piety, that idea of always paying attention to your ancestors, listening to your elders, that's going to also be very important. So you're going to see this in Korea as well. They're going to start to become more and more independent, and they're going to keep their own culture, so much so that they create a new alphabet. Let me pull that up for you, called Hangul. So this is what Hangul looks like. And this is an entire alphabet that they created. That's kind of interesting. All right, so this is the Hangul alphabet. So this is what they create in China. Let's go back. I'm sorry, it's what they create in Korea. So in Korea, like I said, they use a tribute system. So this is an 18th century Korean painting depicting the Korean diplomatic mission to the Qing China, approaching the city of Shenwan on its way to offer tribute to the emperor in Beijing, which was 190 miles away. Such tribute missions offered opportunities for the Korean delegation to see something in China. So maybe they would see some of it, take it back with them. And according to the diaries of Korean envoys, they, of course, categorized sites along the route to Beijing as under historical, curiosity, spectacle. Um, so the tribute system, that's how we're going to use it. They're going to use it to stay in touch with China, learn from China, but also hopefully keep China from getting too involved. Vietnam. So Vietnam is going to borrow heavily on China, but think about it. China borrowed heavily, not borrowed, but really kind of took their rice, got a lot of rice from them. So you're going to see that borrowing be reciprocated here. Vietnam is going to borrow heavily on China. They're going to borrow their religion, their bureaucracy, their literary styles, but they're going to want to remain within their own culture, and they're going to want to remain free from China, except again through the tribute system. So here's another similarity with Vietnam and Korea. Both are going to use the tribute system with China. Vietnamese elites are going to be deeply rooted to Chinese culture. They're going to be viewed as superior, and that they consider themselves an extension of it. Their personal culture, such as language, fondness for cockfighting or chewing betel nuts, that's all going to stay the same. So they don't completely get rid of some of their own personal connections in history and culture. Here's an image. So if I look at this picture, this says that it is it is a 938 Vietnamese forces under the leadership of General Ngo Nguyen defeating the Chinese in the Battle of the Bac Dong River, thus ending thousands of years of direct Chinese rule. So here they're saying this is not in Chinese rule. So this image is going to be a lot that is going to celebrate that victory. But how can I look at this image and say, wow, I see that there is Chinese culture embedded in Vietnam, even though they are going for that freedom? So mostly what you're going to look at is you're going to look at the flags and the clothing styles. Those are really going to show us the Chinese culture and how they were embedded in that. Japan. Well, Japan is a whole nother story. Japan is more than 100 miles away, separated by an ocean. They're going to borrow a lot from China. Japan actually wants to recreate a little China, but they're never going to be able to do that. They're not going to have the seamless bureaucracy that China had. They don't have Confucianism. Confucianism is telling them to keep all that in check, keep your people in check. Everybody's supposed to listen to the government, and they don't have that. So since they're unable to establish this, the samurai class is born. These are educated men. So here's a samurai. This is actually a super famous painting. You'll see this one a lot. This is a late 18th century image showing a samurai warrior on horseback. He's got his gear on with his helmet. He's carrying his sword and his bow and arrows. Japanese culture was definitely one thing that was very important to them. They did borrow some things from Chinese culture, but this whole idea of the samurai was very much Japanese, very independent of any other culture. Japanese independence, they're going to remain independent in the way of religion. Their religion is kami at the time, and they're also going to remain independent in governing. Not even the Mongols could take over Japan. So that's kind of cool. What you're going to see is you're going to see this idea of Bushido and samurai, which is death over surrender. So they'd rather die than to surrender to someone. And we're going to actually see that right up till World War II. So here's a lovely picture. So painting is also going to be really important to the Japanese. More art. Again, they must have plenty of food if they've got time for art. Lady Murasaki Shikdu, drew upon her experience as a lady in waiting at the imperial court to craft her famous novel, The Tale of Genji. Very famous novel. Remember that one. She allegedly began to write the novel in 1004 at the Buddhist temple, and she was inspired by the full moon. And a lot of it was, of course, done in woodblock printing because that's what you did at the time.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes and it's beautiful. In the year negative a billion, Japan might not have been here. In the year negative 40,000, it was here, and you could walk to it, and some people walked to it. Then it got warmer, some icebergs melted, it became an island, and now there's lots of trees, because it's warmer. So now there's people on the island, they're basically sort of hanging out in between the mountains, eating nuts off trees, and using the latest technology, like stones and bowls. Ding dong, It's the outside world, and they have technology from the future, like really good metal and crazy rice farms. Now you can make a lot of rice really, really quickly. That means if you own the farm, you own a lot of food, which is something everybody needs to survive. So that makes you king. Rice farming and rice kingdoms spread across the land, all the way to here. The most important kingdoms were here, 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 and here. But this one was the most important, ruled by a heavenly superperson, or emperor for short. Knock knock, get the door, it's religion. The new prince wants everyone to try this hot new religion from Biekt. Please try this religion, he said. No, said everybody. Try it, he said. No, said everybody again, quieter this time. And so the religion was put into place, and all the rules that came with it. Then the government was taken over by another clique, and they made some reforms, like making the government govern more, and making the government more like China's government, which is a government that governs more. Hi, China, they said. Hi, said China. Can you call us something else other than said Japan. Like what? Said China. How about Sunrise Land? Said Japan. And they stole China's alphabet and wrote a book about themselves. And then they made lots of poetry and art and another book about themselves. Then they stopped moving the capital every time the emperor died and kept it in one place for a while, right here. And they conquered the north finally. Get that squared away. A rich hipster named Kukai is bored with modern Buddhism, visits China, and learns a better version, which is more spiritual. Comes back, reinvents the alphabet, and causes art and literature to be great for a long time. And the royal palace turned into such a dream world of art that they really didn't give a shit about running the country. So if you live outside the palace, how are you supposed to protect your from criminals? Hire a samurai. Everyone started hiring samurai. Rich, important people hired samurai. Poor people who could not afford to hire samurai did not hire samurai. The samurai became organized and powerful, more powerful than the government, so they made their own military government here. They let the emperor still be emperor, but the shogun is actually in control.
Okay, and so that is where we are in Japan. That is where they are. The samurai were very important, and they actually ended up creating their own government that were shogun. So let us wrap up Song China.
Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to Hiemler History. In this video, we begin our exploration of AP World History proper. And what better place to begin than by figuring out what was going on in China from 1200 to 1450? Let's get to it. Now, in terms of world history, China has always been kind of a big deal. For all sorts of reasons that will become clear in the span of this video, China was kind of like the Texas of the ancient world. Don't mess with China. So by 1000 CE, China was still the world's preeminent power. By 960, China was split into regional kingdoms as the power of the Tang Dynasty was gradually waning. Now, let me introduce you to Zhou Guangyin. He was the ruler of one of those kingdoms and took it upon himself to gather all of them up into a unified dynastic empire known as the Song Dynasty, which remained in China from 960 to 1279. When it comes to state building, the Song rulers knew what they were doing. Building on the innovations of the Tang Dynasty, the Song emperors would build a state structure that would last well over 1,000 years. And here's what that state structure looked like. They divided oversight of that state into 6 departments: personnel, finance, rights, army, justice, and public works. And then overseeing all of these departments was the censorate, who made sure that no one in these bureaucratic departments was behaving like a turd. And if they were behaving like a turd, they got flushed. And one of the chief things that helped organize the Chinese government during that time was Confucianism. This would be one of the great continuities in Chinese culture over the years. So what you really need to know about Confucianism is that according to Confucian thought, when they looked at the world, they understood reality as fundamentally hierarchical. Everyone has their different place in society, and it only works if everyone in their place behaves rightly. The people had to be subject to their rulers, women had to be subject to their husbands, children had to be subject to their fathers. Now, as such, one of the major achievements of the Song government, deeply influenced by Confucian ideals, was the revival of the civil service examination. This was a test that you had to pass in order to work in the imperial bureaucracy, and a major part of that exam was being well versed in Confucian ideals. And the implementation and the expansion of that exam had the effect of shifting power from a hereditary form of aristocracy to a new class of scholarly leaders. And now, with such a highly organized government, the Chinese empire could focus on what every empire wants to focus on, namely the accumulation of the boom boom. Chinese merchants participated heavily in the robust system of long-distance trade across Afro-Eurasia. Okay, stop. What is Afro-Eurasia? Despite what it sounds like, it's not Eurasia with a 70s style haircut. It's referring to the African, European, and Asian landmass, which when we're talking about world history, we often treat as an interconnected whole and call it Afro-Eurasia. So as I was saying, Chinese merchants crisscrossed Afro-Eurasia, carrying goods to be bought and sold in mass. The result of this trade was an increasingly commercialized Chinese society. And what that means is this. For a lot of world history, people produced goods for their own personal use, or if not for their own personal use, then for use in the general regional area. And when I say that the Chinese society is becoming more commercialized, what I mean is that now people are producing goods not for their own personal use, but for use and sale in distant markets. As a result of this, Chinese manufacturing flourished during this period. For example, China's iron production in 1200 rivaled Europe's iron production in the 18th century. But I get ahead of myself. But by the 11th century, all right, stop again. When I say the 11th century, I mean the 1000s. The 12th century is the 1100s, the 13th century is the 1200s, and on and on and on. Okay, we good? Let's get back to it. By the 11th century, China's iron industry, according to their meticulous records, was producing 32,000 suits of armor and 16 million iron arrowheads annually. And because Chinese commerce was expanding rapidly during this time, it also transformed the role of money. As the economy grew, there was not enough precious metal for the minting of coins to keep up with the demand, and this led to the introduction of paper money, which soon became more popular than minted ones. You know, I've always wondered, who was the first guy to try to buy a bunch of stuff with paper? All right, that'll be 4,000 gold coins. Well, I don't have no gold coins, but what I got is this piece of paper. I will cut you. Also during this period of great technological innovation, the Chinese gave us a new kind of boom boom, namely gunpowder. It was actually an accidental discovery by some Taoist alchemists who were trying to discover the elixir of immortality. And one day when that mixture blew up in their faces, they knew they had discovered something explosive. Now, despite what you may think, the immediate application of this newfound concoction was not in a military context. The first application was fireworks and pyrotechnic displays for the imperial court. But eventually, Song military leaders got wise, and as they watched these great explosions in the sky, they thought, wait a minute. I wonder if we can use that stuff that blows up in the sky to blow people up. Spoiler alert, the answer is yes. They found a way to blow up a lot of people with gunpowder. And because China was sort of the grand poobah of this region during this time, we should expect that their culture would influence people around them. And wouldn't you know it? They did. Let's take Japan as an example. Japan, being in close proximity to China, was always contending with the growing influence of Chinese culture. And the Japanese worked hard to form their own identity in order to keep from getting swallowed whole by Chinese influence. Even so, China's influence was all over Japanese culture. For example, here's a picture of the architecture in Japan's capital city, Heian. And here's a picture of the architecture in China's capital city, Chang'an. I'm just kidding, that's Heian and that's Chang'an. How did you not catch that? The point is, as much as the Japanese tried to resist Chinese influence, if you were standing in their capital city, it'd be hard to know whether you're standing in Japan or China. Now, let's briefly talk religion. Now, because China was at the crossroads of major trade highways, there was a significant fusion of cultural and religious influences. And that means that China was not only influencing other people, but they themselves were influenced as well. And maybe one of the most significant influences was Buddhism. Buddhism, of course, came to China from India, but new forms of Buddhism found their way into China along those trade routes. There was a Vietnamese form of Buddhism known as Mahayana Buddhism that was maybe among the most significant. Now, Buddhism in its original form was strictly atheistic, but the Mahayana form of it had transformed into a religion consisting of many deities, veneration of relics, and multiple heavens and hells. And as merchants from Vietnam carried this new form of Buddhism into China, it found many willing converts. Alright, so let's just sum everything up. China's huge population, plus their strong agricultural base, plus their innovations in manufacturing made Song China the wealthiest empire on the planet. But a common language, plus Confucian ideals, plus a culture with deep roots made China the most unified nation on the planet. And for my money, the biggest takeaway from this video is as follows. Don't mess with China. Thanks everybody for coming along. Subscribe if you're not already.
All right, so that is our first section, China and its neighbors.